Hey everyone, and welcome back to our exploration of the Liberty Trail. We hope you've enjoyed our past videos. You probably see on the monument next to me a name that we've talked about quite a bit through our exploration of the Liberty Trail, of the Camden Battlefield, of historic Camden. Baron Johann de Cobb. This monument was placed in 1909. De Cobb is not actually mortally wounded on this spot, but he is mortally wounded on this battlefield on the other side of the road somewhere behind the camera. Now, in October of 1777, Lieutenant General John Burgoyne is going to surrender his British army at Saratoga to Major General Horatio Gates. We're going to be talking about Gates throughout this video. This surrender, this loss of the British army, is going to force the British High Command, King George and his advisors, to reassess their strategy in North America, because that victory is going to bring in France, as well as other belligerent nations, turning the American Revolution into a world war. And the British decide that they are going to do two things. One, they're going to concentrate their power along the coast. And then number two, they're going to concentrate and refocus their efforts on the southern colonies. And beginning in 1779, the British are going to capture Savannah, Georgia. And then the following spring, May of 1780, Charleston, South Carolina is going to fall to a British army under the command of Sir Henry Clinton. Charleston is one of the largest cities in North America. It's one of the richest in the southern colonies. Fall of Charleston is going to be a major blow to the Continental cause, with the loss of men, supplies, and munitions. And Continental Congress is going to turn to Horatio Gates, send him south to try to salvage the situation as the British are moving into the interior of South Carolina. They're establishing garrisons like the one at Camden that we visited earlier. And Gates is going to be sent south to try to recoup the fortunes of the United States and sort of re-spark the cause of independence. He's going to reach his new army in Hillsborough, North Carolina, toward the end of July of 1780. He's not going to waste any time. He's going to begin marching south into South Carolina to engage the British. Now, I've been standing and talking for a little bit too long. I need to do a little bit of walking. We're going to head to another part of the battlefield where a special guest is waiting for us. Now, as I mentioned, we've now moved to another part of the battlefield. I'm here with our great friend, one of our great partners here in South Carolina that helped us set up the Liberty Trail, the CEO and Executive Director of the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust, Rick Wise. Rick is an expert on the Battle of Camden, so I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to him.
So the movement into South Carolina by Gates' army, a lot of rain, delays it. It gives Lord Rawdon, that's Francis Lord Rawdon, who is the commander at Camden, time to group his troops. He brings in reinforcements from his several outposts, and he puts a block at Little Lynch's Creek. That causes Gates, when he arrives there, to assess the situation and sidestep and go to the west. When he does, he goes to a place called Rugeley's Mill, about 4.5 miles north of the battlefield here. At that time, he makes an assessment of what he's going to do. A lot of folks have spent years trying to figure out what his intent was. What we think it was to just reposition his army to the south to a place called Sanders Creek. Sanders Creek is about 2 miles to the south of the battlefield of Camden. Gates then sends Lieutenant Colonel Francis Marion and 20 men from the location at Rugeley's Mill in what would be a move that would pay off dividends in the American Revolution. Francis Marion is not here at this battle, but goes to take command of the Williamsburg militia, and the rest is history from that standpoint. But what Gates does is he is going to move and march his army, and he's going to march at 10 o'clock at night. And when he's going to march at 10 o'clock at night, he has a specific order of battle, and that specific order of battle has Colonel Charles Armand's cavalry up front. He has light infantry on either flank. He has the remainder of his troops in column behind him, and they're marching. Makes a bit of a problem for his army, however. They don't have rum to give these men, but what they had was molasses. These men who had been surviving on green peaches, green corn, and brown water for 17 days get some lean beef, some undercooked cornmeal, and a gill, which is about 4 ounces of molasses. The accounts are that the men spent more time on the side of the road than on the road. And this would have an impact on this battle. Not only were the men ill, but also as they were making this march, they did not make time on the road that would have put them in a better position. In the meantime, because of the movement to Rugeley's Mill, it caused Lord Rawdon to have to reposition. He had to fall back on Camden to be able to keep his flank from being turned. He sent a message to Lord Cornwallis. Lord Cornwallis was forming the government in Charleston. He receives the message and immediately marches that night. You'll see some accounts that Cornwallis brought in reinforcements with him. Well, not so much in the fact that it was a security detail that came with him, and he rode hard. He arrived somewhere the evening of the 13th, 14th of August. He has over 800 sick in the hospital, mostly from malaria, and most of them coming from the 71st Highlanders who had come over from the outpost at Cheraw. As he assesses his situation, you have to consider Camden to be sort of like a forward operating base. They were gathering supplies, doing the things necessary to be able to move up into North Carolina, which was the next phase of their operation. Cornwallis had kind of a tough decision to have to make. Am I going to abandon the post, have to destroy most of the supplies? My flank on the west side of the Wateree River is being threatened by a party under General Thomas Sumter. What am I going to do? He took another option. He had determined that Gates' position at Rugeley's Mill was not really a very defensible position. He decides he is also going to march. He is going to march at 10 o'clock at night. Both of these armies are going to be marching towards each other from separate directions. The two armies meet here at the battlefield at Camden about 2:30 in the morning. 98% illumination that night. So in that moonlit night, there's an engagement that starts right here that will continue on. And we're going to go to another place at the battlefield where Dan will step back in.
Now we move to another part of the Camden Battlefield. We're essentially behind where Gates deployed his militia to hold the left end or the left flank of his position. And from here you get a really good sense of the terrain here at the battlefield. This battlefield has not really changed since August of 1780. It was longleaf pine. The pines sort of created a canopy-like feature here that would trap the black powder smoke, the acrid smoke. Even coming out to this battlefield so many years after this engagement, you can still see and you can still feel what the soldiers themselves on both sides experienced. Now, as Rick mentioned, Gates and Cornwallis are on a collision course marching toward one another. They're marching along the Great Wagon Road. The Great Wagon Road was one of the main roads that ran from Philadelphia to the Georgia frontier. And that is really why the armies come here. They utilize that road network, and you can point to the wagon road as why there are so many engagements throughout this area and around Camden, South Carolina. It's because of that road. Leading Gates' advance are dragoons and light infantry under Charles Ormond and Charles Porterfield. Leading Cornwallis' advance is the British Legion commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton. And about a half mile behind me in the far tree line, Tarleton and Ormond are going to collide, and the first shots of the battle are going to be fired. The light infantry under Charles Porterfield of Virginia is going to come up. They're going to deploy on either side of the road and engage the British. Porterfield is going to be wounded during this action, and he's going to be taken off the field. He's actually going to die not shortly after the battle, but several months later from this wound. The two sides are then going to break off, and both of the main armies are going to continue to move toward one another, and they're going to begin their deployment. One of the great controversies surrounding this battle is Gates' deployment here at Camden. Now, in the 18th century, the honor of holding the right of the line was always held by the best regiments in the army. And Charles Cornwallis is going to deploy a brigade under the command of a fellow named James Webster. He's a lieutenant colonel. He's commanding the 23rd and 33rd Regiments of Foot, arguably some of the best troops in the entire British Army. And to face them on his left, Gates is going to place his inexperienced militia from Virginia and North Carolina. And it's this deployment that historians are going to later point to as saying this is going to be Gates's ultimate undoing. These raw green troops, some of them firing a shot in anger for the first time, are going to be going up against the best the British has to offer, which is a rather curious deployment. It's different than the deployment that Gates made at Saratoga, where he won his great victory just a few years earlier. He placed on his left Benedict Arnold's division, his best division under his best commander, to face Burgoyne's light troops, who he knew would be posted on the British right. So it's a rather curious deployment from the perspective of Horatio Gates. On Gates's right flank, on the western side of the Great Wagon Road, he's going to place Johann de Cobb and 2 brigades of Maryland Continentals and the Delaware troops, arguably some of the finest in the Continental Army. To face them, Cornwallis is going to solidify the left of his line with Francis Rowden, the Volunteers of Ireland, and several other loyalist units. To talk more about the battle, I'm going to bring Rick back on to get the fighting started.
Here at the battlefield of Camden, we have to take into account the terrain. When General Gates positioned his right flank under Baron de Kalb, one of the things that took place was he put it up against a Pocosin-type swamp. His right flank was protected. His left flank was protected by the ground that dropped off into low ground over here on the east side. Though his flanks were protected, it actually served more to Cornwallis's benefit, because Lord Cornwallis would not have to worry about his flanks, as he was outnumbered about 3,400 to about 2,300 troops. Gates called his commanders together. He asked, "Gentlemen, what are we to do?" No one said anything except General Edward Stevens of the Virginia militia, who said, "Is there anything else to do but fight?" At which point the commanders were sent back to their respective commands to wait for daylight that would take place a little bit before 5 o'clock in the morning. As Otho Holland Williams talked to Captain Anthony Singleton, who commanded 2 6-pounders that were in the Great Wagon Road, Captain Singleton saw the British as they began to file into line, as they displayed to the east with their regular troops, as they displayed to the left with their provincial troops and militia. Captain Singleton asked for permission to fire. Williams gave it and rode back to General Gates' headquarters. When he gets to Gates' headquarters, Gates has the 1st Maryland Brigade in reserve at that location. That's about a quarter mile from where we're standing right now to the north. Williams receives permission to take troops from the Virginia militia and move to try to block the deployment of the British that are on the east side of the battlefield. In the meantime, Gates also sends the 1st Maryland Brigade to reinforce the British. So they're marching in oblique across to the east to reinforce. As they are doing that, he also sends one of his aides, Major Thomas Pinckney, future governor of South Carolina, is sent over to Baron de Kalb to order de Kalb to attack as well. Several things are happening simultaneously. De Kalb attacks and has an immediate effect, and he's pushing Rawdon's troops back. In the meantime, as Williams takes the Virginia militia into the woods, he's not greeted by troops that are trying to form up, the 23rd Royal Welsh Fusiliers and the 33rd Regiment of Foot. Instead, these men are coming towards him. These men have fixed bayonets. They're at extended interval, double arm interval, coming through the woods at a double quick. They're yelling, "Huzzah, huzzah!" The drums are thundering, and the psychological effect must have been amazing on these troops that had never heard a shot fired in anger. Because a few shots were fired, and the next thing that happens is the bayonets are on them. And these men that had gone forward, about 50 men with Williams, come streaming back towards the line. And when they do this, one man throws down his weapon, another man throws down his weapon, and soon it's a deluge, a flood of men running to the rear. Most of the militia, some 2,000 strong, threw down their weapons and ran without firing a shot. things that you can't plan for. Gates and the other general officers are trying to stop that flood of men going to the rear. They tried several times, and unfortunately for the American cause, Gates and his entourage are pushed all the way back until eventually he gets to Rugeley's Mill. He can't stop the men who are running away. In the meantime, Webster is an outstanding commander. He does not go after the running militia. Instead, he starts to wheel to engage the 1st Maryland. And the 1st Maryland is in the fight for their life, as not only are they trying to defend their section of the battlefield, they're trying to keep the British from being able to outflank DeKalb and rush in on his flank. In the meantime, DeKalb is in a back and forth battle. They're going very hard. He's got the 2nd Maryland Brigade with the Delaware Regiment beside them, and they're in a back and forth action that is going to change hands several times from a standpoint of bayonet charge received and repulsed, and then their bayonet charge being received and repulsed. DeKalb, 59 years old, is in the midst of the battle. He's wounded early in the battle. His horse is killed under him, but on foot, he is leading those Continental troops. And as he's leading those Continental troops, he goes on until eventually he suffers 11 wounds, 3 gunshot wounds and 8 bayonet or saber wounds. An unbelievably outstanding leader on the battlefield that day. In the meantime, there is one regiment of militia that stands and fights. Colonel Hal Dixon's North Carolinians, they're standing and fighting, and even the British wrote about the fact that they stood and fought the way that they did. Outstanding performance by Hal Dixon's men. And in the process of all this taking place, the British relentlessly push back the 1st Maryland until they're at right angles to the road. There's about a 200-yard gap between Baron DeKalb's left and the 1st Maryland's right. Lord Cornwallis, an outstanding tactical commander, sees the advantage he has, and he deploys his reserves. Tarleton's Legion Cavalry and the 71st Highlanders. They exploit the gap between the two flanks. At about the same time that Otho Holland Williams, again on the battlefield all over the place, reports to DeKalb that his left flank is gone. DeKalb at that point orders his men to begin a retreat. The battle falls all the way back onto the northwest side of the battlefield to what we call Disassembly Hill. Archaeology there shows intense hand-to-hand combat. The army disintegrates. It's the worst tactical defeat of a Continental Army in the American Revolution. And you would think it would be the end. It was not. But we want to talk about what happened here, and to do that, we're going to go to a very special place on the battlefield.
Now, as Rick mentioned, Camden is the worst tactical defeat ever inflicted upon a Continental force during the American Revolution. But there is still, though, through the darkness of this defeat, a glimmer of hope. And it's riding south to South Carolina in the form of 2 men. The first is coming from Virginia, Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan had resigned his commission for lack of promotion with the Continental Congress. He is sitting at home outside of Winchester, Virginia, when he receives news of Gates's defeat. And without a command, he's going to mount his horse and ride to join the Southern Army. And Morgan is going to be instrumental in orchestrating one of the great victories of the war for the Continentals at Cowpens on January 17th, 1781, a victory that will help turn the tide here in the South. Riding south eventually from New York is Nathaniel Greene, Gates's replacement. Greene, from the time of his arrival in December of 1780 to 2 years later, in December of 1782, is going to orchestrate a campaign that will ultimately drive the British from South Carolina and see Greene ride victoriously into Charleston, South Carolina. Now, to talk a little bit more about where we're standing, and it's a very, very special place, I'm going to bring Rick back on.
In the fall of 2022, we made a very special effort here at the battlefield. My predecessor, Doug Bostic, led the way. And what we did is there were several sites that we knew of where there were soldiers. And those soldiers were, for various reasons, their grave sites were being threatened. So to be able to preserve and protect, an excavation was done using archaeologists and forensics folks who all came in and worked together as a team in an outstanding fashion. And we had hoped to protect and recover 6 sites. Those 6 sites were going to be on either side of the battlefield here, and the utmost effort was going to be made to recover them, to be able to do forensics, to find out more about them and hopefully where they came from. And additionally, what we were going to do is place them right back here on the battlefield where they were. We're here at one of the sites where there are 5 Continental soldiers were recovered. Now, ladies and gentlemen, as I said earlier, we were going to get 6 site locations. The first turned out to be what we believe to be a loyalist and militiaman who also turned out to be a Native American. That created a lot of conditions because of federal requirements or whatever because of being a Native American. The second site, instead of being 1 individual, turned out to be 2. And in doing a quick scout around that grave site, we got another metal detection hit, and there was a grave site that had 3 in that site. All 3 of them teenagers, the youngest about 15 years old. A site here on the east side, we recovered a soldier who was a 71st Highlander. And then at the site that we're at now, we recovered 5 soldiers in this very small grave right here. And you have to understand that after the battle, it was August, and most of these men were buried exactly where they fell, and they expedited getting them into the ground as much as possible. Most of these folks were literally under a foot deep as far as how we had to excavate and be able to find them. And we recovered a total of 14 skeletal remains here at the battlefield of Camden. It was an extremely emotional event for us. Many of us were veterans, and in the process of doing this, you really have a kindred spirit with the soldiers who were here. Ladies and gentlemen, this is not the dusty pages of history. These people were real. And we had the experience here of being able to recover them, and not only that, to be able to commemorate them in their service. Here at this grave site were 5 Continental soldiers, we firmly believe, from the 1st Maryland Brigade. And when we talk about this being hallowed ground, at this site, these men gave their lives protecting the rest of the army that was trying to escape. And through their sacrifice, the soldiers that were able to escape from here, particularly those Continental soldiers, later on went to serve at other locations that helped secure the liberty of this nation. Those soldiers fought at Cowpens, Guilford Courthouse, Hobkirk Hill, 96, Utah Springs, and they were the ones who entered and took Charleston when the British evacuated in 1782. And it was because of the sacrifice of these men that that was able to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the hallowed ground on this battlefield, where we think there are over 400 others just like these men who are here, deserves to be recognized, and that sacrifice to be fully taken into account so that we understand where the liberty of this nation came from.
Thank you, Rick, for that incredibly powerful story. It serves as a reminder that these battlefields are indeed cemeteries, and it also serves as a reminder as to why we work so hard to preserve these battlefields, not only here in South Carolina, but throughout our nation. Speaking of archaeology, we have one more stop to show you here as we continue our exploration of the Liberty Trail and the Camden Battlefield. Now, we've shown you historic Camden. We've also shown you the Camden Battlefield, and we're standing on another part of that battlefield with our friends from the American Veterans Archaeological Recovery. They are conducting a field school here in the hopes of answering some questions that still linger about this battle. Now, we can go to the archives, we can go to repositories, we can read the primary accounts, but the ground, what's in the ground, still has a very strong story to tell that will inform us, hopefully, about how this battle developed and how it occurred. Thank you for joining us on this tour of the Camden Battlefield and historic Camden. We're going to head back out into the field to explore some more Liberty Trail sites.
Hello, this is Trace Atkins. Get inspired at battlefields.org.